The moment she pulls back, she expects you to chase. She wants to see if you'll crack, if you'll fold, if your whole sense of worth is built on her attention. And most of you do. You text, you call, you wonder what you did wrong, you beg, you explain, you wait. But what if you stopped doing what she expects and did the one thing that would change your life forever? Comment, I don't chase, if you're ready to reclaim your power. Number 1, why she ignores you. When a woman starts pulling away, she's not just changing her mood. She's calculating your worth. She's observing how much control she really has. She's measuring the depth of your self-respect without ever having to say a word. She's flipping the switch from warmth to cold, not because she's unsure of you, but because she wants to see if you'll lose your spine trying to get her back. And if you do, you fail. Not because you weren't enough, but because you became too available, too desperate, too predictable, too spineless in her eyes. Because in the moment she creates distance, she expects you to panic. She expects you to call her 10 times. She expects you to wonder what you did wrong and over-explain yourself to a person who already decided to make you question your value. And this isn't about love. This is about control, about power, about dominance in the silent game of emotional leverage that's played in modern relationships, where affection becomes a currency and silence becomes the tool to test the emotional independence of a man. And when you take the bait, when you react, when you start typing paragraphs, apologizing for things you didn't even do, when you start shifting your schedule, your priorities, your self-worth around her vanishing interest, you lose her attraction forever. Because now she knows you don't just love her, you need her, and a woman loses interest the second she becomes your oxygen. The moment she realizes you'll sell yourself out just to keep her attention, that's the moment she turns cold for good. And now you're pacing. Your mind is racing, wondering if you'll ever get back to what you had. But what you had wasn't real if it can vanish with no conversation, no honesty, no explanation. If she can go from being your safe place to a stranger overnight and still sleep well, you've got to ask yourself, what was the foundation of this bond to begin with? Because love built on fragile egos and emotional neediness can't survive in the real world. And yet most men continue this cycle. They fall into the illusion that if they try harder, if they become nicer, if they apologize for being themselves, she'll come back. But she won't. Not because she doesn't want you, but because she already saw you give up your dignity to chase her approval. And once that image is burnt into her mind, there's no recovery, because she doesn't want a man she can dominate emotionally. She wants a man she can feel grounded by. And if you flinch when she withdraws, if your entire emotional state rises and falls based on whether or not she texts back, then you're not in love. You're in dependence. You've attached your value to a person who is now using it against you. And the worst part is you know it. Deep down you feel it. Every time you double text, every time you stare at the read receipt, every time you justify being ignored as maybe she's just busy, you chip away at your own self-trust. And if you've ever found yourself going over old conversations trying to find the exact moment it changed, thinking maybe you were too clingy or maybe not clingy enough, you're caught in the emotional trap that was designed to pull you into self-doubt, so you stop focusing on who you are and start obsessing over how to win someone back who walked out without warning. But a woman who values you doesn't leave you in limbo. She doesn't weaponize distance. She doesn't ghost and gaslight and then return when she feels like it, because someone who sees you as valuable doesn't risk losing you. And the hardest truth to accept is this. She knows exactly what she's doing. Every delayed text, every one-word reply, every story she posts without responding to your message. It's not forgetfulness, it's strategy. And when you treat it like an accident, you enable it. You teach her that you're the man who will chase after disrespect, the man who will lower his standards to stay close to someone who doesn't even see him. And if that's not painful enough, think about this. Every time you try to convince her to choose you again, you become less attractive, not more, because attraction isn't built through pleading. It's built through presence, through certainty, through self-control in the face of emotional withdrawal. And if you can't hold your frame when things get confusing, you become the emotional equivalent of a house with no foundation. One storm and you collapse. So the next time you feel that gut punch of being ignored, don't ask what you did wrong. Ask what part of you is still seeking validation from someone who's playing with your peace. Ask what childhood wound is being triggered when someone pulls away. Ask why you keep entertaining people who make you question your worth instead of people who reflect it back to you. And maybe, just maybe, you'll see that the silence she's giving you is not an attack. It's a revelation. It's clarity. It's proof that you were placing your value in the wrong hands all along, and that now you get to decide, not how to get her back, but how to get yourself back. Because when a woman ignores you, the most powerful move isn't to respond with more energy, it's to reallocate that energy to the things that make you strong, focused, and dangerous in a world that rewards weakness with silence and punishes desperation with indifference. And the truth is, she wants to feel your absence. She wants to know that if she walks, you won't crawl after her, because nothing flips the dynamic like indifference born from self-respect, not fake games, not petty tactics, but the kind of grounded power that comes from a man who no longer entertains people who confuse access with value. And the moment you make that shift, the moment you stop being reactive and start being rooted, you become a man she can't figure out, a man she can't shake, a man who's not dependent on her attention because he's too busy building a life she was too blind to see herself fitting into. And that's when the tables turn. Not when you send that paragraph, not when you call again, but when you realize that her silence isn't rejection, it's redirection, a reminder that your energy is too valuable to be spent trying to prove yourself to someone who walked away like you were disposable. And the second you embody that truth, everything in your life begins to change. Not just your relationships, but your discipline, your confidence, your boundaries, because you're no longer negotiating your value. You're walking in it, fully, freely, and without apology. And that's the man she never saw coming. The man who chooses his peace over confusion, his clarity over chaos, and his growth over validation. And if you're ready to become that man, not just in moments of rejection, but in every area of your life, then the Stoic relationship blueprint is exactly where you start. This isn't just a book. It's a life-altering guide built on timeless principles that teach you how to respond to emotional challenges with strength, clarity, and purpose. And now it's available in audiobook format, so you can absorb this knowledge while you walk, train, drive, or just sit with your thoughts. Imagine starting your mornings not with confusion or self-doubt, but with powerful insights that anchor you in who you are. The link is in the comments. Number 2. Silence is your power. When she pulls away and your first instinct is to explain yourself, to ask what's wrong, to close the distance she created, you've already given her the confirmation she's looking for, that you need her more than she needs you. And in a world where attention is currency and emotional leverage is used like a weapon, the man who reacts loses every time, because she doesn't need to hear from you to know you're still hooked. She watches how quickly you lose your center, how fast you fold when her energy disappears. And most of you do it unconsciously, thinking it's love, thinking you're fixing something. But what you're really doing is proving to her that your emotional stability is under her control. And that's the exact moment she loses respect for you, because she knows now that she can manipulate the pace of the relationship, that she can disappear for a few hours, a few days, even a week, and come back whenever she pleases, and you'll still be there, waiting, hoping, chasing. And that's why silence isn't about punishment. It's about preservation. It's about protecting your self-worth from being eroded by someone who sees your consistency as weakness, because when you go silent, you communicate one thing clearly. Your peace is not dependent on anyone else's presence, and that makes you rare. And in this generation where attention is cheap and men are constantly overexerting to prove they're worthy, the man who can stay calm, centered and unbothered becomes the one who commands attention without asking for it. But most of you haven't learned that yet, because you've been conditioned to respond immediately, to over-communicate, to solve problems that aren't even yours. And now you're in this loop where every time she pulls away, you start convincing, you start promising, you start explaining how much you care, and she hears every word but feels none of it. Because the more you speak while she stays silent, the less powerful your voice becomes. And if you truly want to change the dynamic, if you truly want to gain control over your emotions and your relationships, you have to embrace the discomfort of silence, because silence forces growth. It demands discipline. It reveals the areas in your life you've neglected, because instead of chasing a woman who isn't matching your energy, you should be building the version of you that doesn't even notice she's gone. And that's not cold, it's clarity. And when you're clear, everything changes, because now your attention has a boundary. Now your communication has weight. Now your presence has meaning. And she feels that, whether she admits it or not, and the moment you stop responding immediately, the moment you stop breaking your silence to explain yourself to someone who chooses to ignore you, she starts wondering what changed, because she expected the same pattern. She expected you to chase, to fold, to break. And instead, you became the man she couldn't manipulate anymore, and it shakes her. Not because she cares, but because her control is gone. And that's the only thing she ever truly valued in the dynamic. And if you're tired of being the man who's always proving himself, who's always left wondering where he stands, then the only way out is to take your power back through discipline. And that discipline starts with restraint, because real strength isn't in how loud you speak. It's in how still you remain when everything inside you is screaming to react. And if you can master that, you become untouchable. Not by her validation, but by your own sense of worth. Because now you're not chasing attention, you're investing in purpose. And now your energy isn't scattered. It's focused, it's valuable, it's unavailable to people who don't earn it. And if you've ever felt like you're always the one giving more, always the one trying harder, always the one wondering what's wrong while she posts stories like nothing happened, then silence is your path to freedom, because silence disrupts her game, it interrupts her control, it resets the dynamic, and not in a manipulative way, but in a way that reminds you who the hell you are. Because when you stop chasing someone who's drifting away, you allow yourself to start chasing the man you're meant to become, the man who doesn't send paragraphs to prove his love, the man who doesn't beg to be seen, the man who doesn't explain his worth to someone who's clearly choosing not to see it. And if you can hold your silence long enough, not out of pride but out of purpose, everything around you shifts, because now you have time, energy, and clarity to focus on what truly matters, like your goals, your fitness, your money, your circle, your mindset, and every second you would have spent waiting for her to reply becomes a deposit into your own self-respect account, and the compound interest of that investment is life-changing, because now you walk different, you think different, you speak different, and suddenly the same woman who couldn't be bothered to respond is now checking your stories, liking your posts, trying to find a way back in. But it's too late. Not because you're trying to punish her, but because you've outgrown her, and the man you've become no longer fits into the mold of who she once had power over, and that's how you win. Not with noise, but with presence. Not with explanation, but with elevation. And the sooner you learn to use silence as a weapon of self-discipline, instead of a tool of manipulation, the sooner you rise above the emotional chaos and build a life that doesn't flinch when someone walks away, because you finally realize that what they took wasn't worth what they cost. And in that moment, you're free. Number 3. Detach without bitterness. You don't detach to get her attention. You don't detach because it's trendy. You don't detach to manipulate her emotions. You detach because your dignity is worth more than your desire to be chosen by someone who clearly doesn't value you. And when you're finally honest with yourself, when you stop lying to yourself about her potential, when you stop creating excuses for her indifference, her hot and cold games, her disappearing acts followed by sudden returns when it's convenient for her, you begin to realize that she was never confused. She was just comfortable. Comfortable knowing that no matter how badly she treated you, you'd still be there, available, ready to try again, ready to prove yourself. And that's why the detachment has to be absolute, not half-hearted, not a waiting game, not a pause until she comes back. It has to be a permanent shift in your emotional priorities. A decision to withdraw your attention from someone who used it like a toy and reinvest it into yourself without guilt, without explanation, without needing closure. Because the closure is in the way she acted. The closure is in the patterns she showed you over and over again. And the more you try to make sense of her behavior, the more power you give to someone who has already made a choice through her actions, even if she never says it out loud. And if you've ever found yourself hoping she'll change, hoping she'll realize what she lost, hoping she'll apologize and suddenly show up as the woman you imagined she could be, you're still attached to a fantasy, not the reality. And that fantasy is what's keeping you stuck. It's what's feeding your obsession, your need for validation, your inability to let go, because you're not holding on to her. You're holding on to the version of her you created in your mind, the version who never truly existed. And if you want to break free, if you want to become the man who no longer tolerates disrespect, disguised as complexity, you have to start telling yourself the truth. And that truth is this. A woman who cares doesn't confuse you. She doesn't play games with your time and energy. She doesn't ignore you and expect you to chase her. She doesn't disappear and then blame you for her distance. She doesn't punish you with silence just to test if you'll break. And if she does, then you're not in a relationship. You're in a power imbalance, one where you're always the one initiating, always the one forgiving, always the one explaining yourself while she sits back and measures how much of yourself you'll give just to stay close to her. And that's not love. That's emotional servitude. And detachment is your only way out. And don't confuse detachment with bitterness. Because bitterness keeps you angry. It keeps you trapped in resentment, in mental arguments with someone who's already moved on. It poisons your ability to heal. While detachment is clarity. Detachment is the understanding that you can't change her, but you can change your standards, that you can't force her to respect you, but you can refuse to accept disrespect, and that requires strength, not in your emotions, but in your decisions, because it's easy to fall back into the cycle, easy to reply when she finally texts again, easy to meet up and pretend like nothing happened, easy to fall for the same smile, the same voice, the same routine. But strength is in the pause. Strength is in sitting with the discomfort of letting go. Strength is in choosing your future over your feelings. And that's what most men never do. They cling to what hurts them because they're addicted to the highs and ignore the lows. But you're not here for temporary affection. You're here to build a life of stability, purpose, and peace. And that can't happen when you're emotionally enslaved to someone who sees your love as leverage. So you detach, not to hurt her, not to get a reaction, but because you've finally decided that your energy is not a charity for those who disrespect it. And the more you sit in that truth, the more you see her clearly, not as the woman you wanted, but as the woman she really is. The one who couldn't communicate like an adult. The one who made you feel like you were too much just so she could feel like she was enough. The one who used attention as a reward and silence as a punishment. The one who thought she could come and go without consequence. And once you see that clearly, detachment becomes natural. because now you're not detaching from a person. You're detaching from a pattern, from a mindset that kept you small, reactive, and emotionally unstable. And in that detachment, you rediscover yourself, not the version of you that was always seeking her love, but the version who no longer needs anyone's approval to feel whole. And you do it quietly, without anger, without posts, without explanations. Because real detachment is silent, it's private, it's personal, and it doesn't seek validation. It lives in conviction, and when she realizes you're no longer chasing, when she senses that she's no longer the center of your emotional world, she'll try to return. Not because she changed, but because your silence forced her to see that the man she once controlled is now untouchable, and that's your final test. Not to let her back in because she came back, but to ask yourself if you've grown enough to never repeat the lesson again. And when your answer is yes, when you no longer feel the need to prove yourself to someone who already had the chance to choose you and didn't, you win. Not because she regrets it, but because you've finally outgrown the version of yourself that needed her in the first place. Number 4. Become untouchable. You don't become untouchable by pretending you don't care. You become untouchable by no longer needing anything from people who fail to show up. You don't fake distance to get a reaction. You remove yourself completely because you finally understand that your peace is too expensive to be spent on someone who sees your consistency as a weakness. And the moment you decide that you are no longer available to anyone who brings confusion instead of clarity, you start becoming something no one can shake, not because you're hard or cold or emotionless, but because you've grown tired of being the one who always initiates, the one who cares too much, the one who lowers his standards just to keep someone who doesn't even know what they want. And if you've ever sat there asking yourself why you feel so drained in the presence of someone who says all the right things but disappears when it matters most, then you've already begun waking up to the truth that being soft in the face of chaos will never bring you peace, that waiting for someone else to change is a slow death, and that the only real transformation comes when you finally choose yourself over your desire to be wanted by someone who feeds off your need for reassurance. And it's not about becoming arrogant. It's about becoming centered, focused, sharp, self-contained, where your validation isn't found in text replies or in someone's return, but in the daily discipline of building a life so full of vision, so grounded in reality, that anyone who enters it has to meet you at your level or leave. And the reason most of you keep breaking down when she pulls away is because your entire identity is built on her response. Your mood rises and falls based on if she's loving or distant. And that's a weakness that has to die if you want to evolve, because being untouchable isn't about hurting others. It's about refusing to be hurt by those who haven't earned the right to access your energy. And it starts in the smallest habits: how you start your morning, how you train your body, how you protect your focus, how you eliminate distractions, how you stop giving people who don't respect you front row seats in your life. And you won't master it overnight. But every time you choose progress over pity, every time you go to the gym instead of checking her social media, every time you build your business instead of sending another text, you take back a piece of your power. And power doesn't announce itself with noise. It moves in silence. It's felt in your presence. It's seen in your discipline. It's reflected in your results. And when you stop explaining yourself to people who constantly misunderstand you, when you stop trying to be understood by those who never saw you clearly in the first place, you become someone they can't figure out, someone they can't manipulate, someone they can't forget, because now you're not reactive, you're intentional, you're no longer trying to prove anything to anyone, you're too busy becoming undeniable, and that's the key, not just in relationships, but in life, because once you stop giving people permission to play with your peace, you become dangerous in the best way, and now she sees it. She sees the change not in your posts, but in your absence, not in your words, but in your refusal to engage, and it burns. because the same man she thought would wait forever is now untouchable. Not because he's bitter, but because he's better, and you don't have to flaunt it. You just live it, building, creating, expanding, and when your life becomes bigger than your emotions, you stop bleeding for people who wouldn't even hand you a bandage, and that's when you win. Not because you got her back, but because you stopped needing her to feel whole, and now everything changes. Your standards, your goals, your confidence, your walk, your voice. Because the man who once gave too much is now the man who gives only to those who prove they're worth it. And that shift. That's permanent, because now your energy is exclusive, your time is sacred, and your vision is clear. And once you've tasted that kind of self-respect, you'll never settle for anything less again. Because being untouchable doesn't mean you don't feel, it means you don't fold. And if she ever comes back, and she will, it won't be to the same man she left. It'll be to someone she no longer qualifies for. Number 5. Set your new standards. You don't change your life by hoping someone finally treats you right. You change your life by deciding what you will never again tolerate. Because every time you accept less than what you deserve, you reinforce to yourself that your boundaries are flexible, and flexibility in standards is what leads most men into emotional chaos, into relationships where they walk on eggshells, where they're constantly confused, where they feel like they have to earn basic respect. And if that's you, if you've ever felt like you're trying to unlock someone who refuses to be open with you, then it's not just her behavior you need to address, it's your own expectations. Because when you raise your standards, you stop negotiating your value. You stop explaining yourself to people who never intended to understand you in the first place. You stop hoping to be chosen by someone who sees you as disposable, and instead you start choosing yourself, not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded, focused, and non-negotiable way, where your time, your presence, and your energy are reserved only for people who prove through consistent action that they deserve it. And the truth is, most men are not struggling with relationships. They're struggling with standards that are so low, anyone can access them. And that's why you find yourself constantly in cycles with women who don't respect you, who breadcrumb you, who use your kindness as currency, who return only when it's convenient. And the reason you allow it is because somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that love means tolerance, that affection means patience, that commitment means suffering silently, but that narrative is broken. And if you want to be a man that commands real respect, you need to operate with clarity, and clarity starts with a list, not a wish list, but a non-negotiable standard list of what you will and will not accept anymore. And you write it down, not just mentally but physically. You make it law in your life. You look at your past, and you list out every single behavior that drained you, every action that made you feel small, every red flag you ignored, and you burn it into your mind that the next time you see it, there is no second chance. There is no, but she's different. There is no potential. You enforce your standard like your life depends on it, because it does. And when you do that, everything changes. Because now you're not reacting to women anymore. You're qualifying them. You're watching how they move, how they speak, how they handle conflict, how they show up when it's uncomfortable. And you're not afraid to walk away at the first sign of disrespect. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. And that clarity will scare people who are used to playing games, who are used to manipulating, who are used to testing your boundaries. Because now you don't flinch. Now you don't chase. Now you don't explain why you left. You just leave. And that silence carries more weight than 1,000 conversations, because a man with standards doesn't need to justify walking away from chaos. And if she calls you controlling or emotionally unavailable because you refuse to tolerate her mood swings, her inconsistencies, her disrespect, let her talk. Let her post about how real men fight for love. Because you're not here to fight for love. You're here to build peace. And peace only exists when your standards protect you from people who bring confusion, and don't let loneliness convince you to negotiate that peace, because that's the trap. That's how they get back in, with nostalgia, with old photos, with the "I miss you" texts at 2 a.m., when they feel lonely and need attention. And you have to be stronger than that. You have to remember the cost, the sleepless nights, the emotional roller coasters, the self-doubt, the way you felt after chasing her for the 5th time, only to be left unread again, and you have to feel that pain deeply enough that you never want to revisit it again, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom, because real wisdom comes from lived pain. And when you've lived it enough times, you stop trying to change people and start changing your standards. And from that moment, the way you walk into every room shifts, the way you speak changes, the way you handle conflict transforms, because now you're no longer seeking validation. You're seeking alignment. And if she doesn't align, she doesn't stay. And that's it. No overthinking, no fixing, no waiting for her to see your worth, because the man with standards doesn't wait to be seen. He sees himself so clearly that anyone who's blind to his value disqualifies themselves instantly. And from that place of power, your entire life elevates. Because now you attract people, women, opportunities, friendships, environments that match your energy, and anyone who doesn't. You don't make space for them, and that's how you win. Not by being liked by everyone, but by being respected by the few who matter. And that starts the moment you say, "Never again will I lower myself to keep someone in my life." And you hold that promise like it's sacred, because it is. If you're tired of being the man who's always confused, always chasing, always questioning his worth while she plays games and disappears without consequence, then this is your moment. Because the truth is, society doesn't want you to think like this. They want you weak, reactive, desperate for approval, blind to the power that comes from knowing who you are and what you will no longer accept. But the Stoic relationship blueprint will shatter that version of you forever. It's filled with timeless Stoic truths that will rewire how you deal with women, pain, and life itself. And now, you can listen to it on audiobook while you walk, train, or rebuild the man inside you. No more waiting, no more hoping, no more begging for closure. It's linked in the comments. Own it now, and own yourself. Comment, "I choose clarity over chaos," if you're ready to claim this transformation. Like the video, subscribe, and help spread this truth to more men who needs to hear this.